whenever you start nurse practitioner school, you need to join your state nurse practitioner organization. I am a big proponent of people joining their professional organizations to begin with, but you need to join your state nurse practitioner organization as a student. Number one, the rate is cheaper. And number two, you can get in there and network with those people, learn who the leaders in that group are. And so all students, I think, should definitely do that because you're going to get tapped into a network that you didn't even know was possible. And you are going to get a lot of help that way. As long as you get involved, you can't just, sit there and join and be like, okay, preceptors come to me.
Hello, and welcome to the Art of Emergency Nursing podcast. This is where we share stories for inspiration, entertainment, and encouragement because we all know emergency nurses have the best stories. Now, here's your host, Kevin McFarland.
All right. So I have on the podcast with me today, Nycole Oliver, and I wanted to bring her on the podcast because I get asked a question all the time that I'm not qualified to answer. And I think I'm qualified to answer everything. But this one for sure not qualified to answer. And that is, the question I get all the time is whether or not people should go for nurse practitioner, or what's what about going for the nurse practitioner or the advanced practice role? So I brought an expert on her journey for a nurse practitioner, and hopefully that can shed a little light and help you make the decision if this is something you should do when you're thinking about it. So I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, I am Nycole Oliver, and I am a dual certified nurse practitioner. So I actually have my doctorate degree in nursing. So I have a DNP, and I am acute care and family practice certified because I knew I wanted to work in the emergency department or at least have the option to work in or out of the hospital, just depending on the situation at the time, basically. And that has benefited me, and we can talk more about that a little later. But I started out as an ER tech in 2001 when I graduated high school. So for those of you guys that are good at math, you can figure out how old I am from there. So I started out as an ER tech, and I was like, I'm going to work. I don't know where I'm going to work yet, but I'm going to work somewhere and I'm going to become a nurse. And so I had already chosen my nursing major. And so at the time, the college that I went to had an associate's degree program. And they don't have that anymore, but they did at that time. And so whenever I interviewed, it was so neat. This is how I got into ER nursing too. But when I interviewed, they said, okay, we have labor and delivery, we have the emergency department, and we have med surge. And I was like, no way am I going to work in labor and delivery. There's
Easy choice.
absolutely no way.
Easy
And
choice there for me. I don't know about the rest of
yeah,
you. Easy choice for me.
oh, for sure. And so I chose the emergency department because med surge, I was like, I don't really know what they do on med surge. And looking back, this was the best decision. So I started working in the emergency department while I went to nursing school. And then I graduated from nursing school in 2004 and started working. I moved from tech to RN and then quickly became charge nurse and then became house supervisor for a while. And then I decided I had started going back for my bachelor's degree, and then I took a year off because I was just tired of school. And that turned into a couple of years. And then I finally went back and I got my BSN in 2010. And then I knew at that point, because I was teaching and things like that, I knew at that point I wanted to further my degree and go into the advanced practice role because I saw that at that time in 2010, it wasn't really a newer role, but there weren't as many people doing it. And I
Mhm.
was like, man, this is going to explode. This is going to be just awesome. Cause we didn't have that many nurse practitioners around. We had a couple and they were mainly used as scribes for, I know the
Wow.
cardiologist and the oncologist. So they were just used as
Interesting.
scribes. And I was like, I'm not going to be a scribe. I'm going to practice and I'm going to help these people. And you know this in the emergency department, you kind of like keep all the doctors from not killing people sometimes because you're like, listen, like you were talking about earlier, like we got to intubate this person now. We got to do this. And hey, I gave this person some medicine. They need this. And so you're basically telling them what to do. And I was like, well, if I'm going to do that, I'm going to get paid for it. And so I decided to go back to school. And after my bachelor's, I only had a year off. And it was only because of the way that the applications for nurse practitioner school. And so I knew if I took more than 1 year off that it would take forever to go back. So they had a BSN to DNP program at the school I
Nice.
went to. And they had the dual role, and I was like, "Man, that's perfect because I can work in the hospital, and then whenever I get to the age where I wanna slow down some," which, happened to be 40 apparently, then I can go work outpatient, and I don't have to work 12-hour shifts anymore, I don't have to work weekends, I don't have to work holidays, and I could work in the clinic, and that would just be, great. So I decided to do all of that. And so that took 4 years from BSN to DNP. So in 2015, I graduated. And the way they had it set up is I got my MSN for nurse practitioner, of course. And then 2 months later, I graduated with my DNP. And so in the same year, in
Nice.
2015, they don't let people do it that way now because it was kind of the DNP was a newer role at that point. And
Mhm.
so they didn't quite have it figured out. And so they don't let people do it like I did. Now, thank goodness, because I would not recommend doing it that way. But so I got my master's and doctorate in the same year. So
Wow.
that's kind of been my educational career journey as far as that kind of stuff goes.
Well, you definitely took the long way. I did the same thing. I did my associates and my bachelor's and my master's, and that's it for me. I'm done. But I say that now, but yeah, every now and then I get that twinge of going, do I want to go back and get a doctorate? And then I come to my senses and think, no, no, I'm good. But
Oh, you
yeah,
think you're done after the doctorate too, but that didn't I graduated, like I said, in 2015, and then, 2023, I was like, "You know what? I think I'm gonna go back and get another master's degree in business." And so I'm almost done with business school now.
I got to tell you, I don't know how many nurses I know that have either the MSN or the DNP, and then go back and get the master's degree. And I see why, because that business sense that you may or may not have from nursing school is what they're going to be looking for if you're going to be in the boardroom of the hospital. They're going to be looking for that MBA. They're not going to be looking for that MSN or even the DNP.
Exactly,
So
exactly.
that's probably like a whole other podcast episode because I think a lot of people are going back and getting their MBAs after the
Uh-huh.
fact.
Oh, yeah,
That's
definitely.
something to definitely think about too. So,
Go on.
well, very cool. So, how long did you have in nursing practice before you became a practitioner?
So I started as a tech in '01 and as a nurse in '04, and then I graduated and became a nurse practitioner in 2015, so 9 years as
It's a
a
long time.
nurse. Yeah.
That's a good long time.
Yep.
Now, that's one of the things
Uh-huh.
that we'll talk about when we talk about the people going from nurse to nurse practitioner. To catch up the audience, I posted something on Facebook and asked, "What questions would you have for this transition to nurse practitioner?" And we got a lot of questions. Uh, but one of the questions was, like, how much time do people need before going from one degree to the next? And I think there's a lot of people who I seen as a when I was working as a nursing faculty member, I seen a lot of people who were finishing nursing school and they're like immediately going like, "Oh, I want to go become a nurse practitioner." I'm like, "Yeah, you're not even a nurse yet." So, what should there be a transition time? Should be some, and this is of course just asking your opinion, and I know that you know the different programs have different requirements. But what are your thoughts on having some time as a nurse before you go to nurse practitioner?
My personal opinion is that people should absolutely have time as a nurse before they become a nurse practitioner because that is what you build your foundation of your practice off of. And if you have no foundation, where are you building your practice off of? And this is another Nicole Oliver personal opinion, but I think that no matter what specialty people go into as an advanced practice nurse, that they should have acute care experience for at least 2 years minimum. I honestly think it should be more like 5, but I think that they should have at least a couple of years in especially the emergency department or ICU, because those areas, as all emergency nurses know, those areas are going to give you the most experience. And I always told students this as a nurse, that ER teaches you how to treat a little bit of everything. Like I always told people I know just enough about everything to not kill somebody. And you have the how to not
Amen.
kill your patient. So I
Amen.
tell people that all the time whenever I was precepting in the ER as a practitioner or as a nurse. I was like, I know just enough about every little thing. And if I don't know, ER gives you those resources because you know all of those specialists because you see them come down to the ER. You know who knows what, and you know who your experts are. And you do not have to know everything, but you need to know who knows all of
Yep.
this different stuff. And so I am just so thankful for my nursing experience in the ER or ED, I guess we're calling it. But in the ED, I had so much experience and I got so many resources and so many just I can text people at the drop of a hat and I can be like, "Hey, I need to get this guy into for an EGD tomorrow. Can you do that for me?" And they're like, "Absolutely." Or, "Hey, so and so needs," and we're going to talk, I'm sure, more about this, but so and so, one of my students needs a preceptor. Do you think you can help me out? I mean, it just gives you so much experience and so many resources that are just you cannot get that anywhere else.
I mean, you can't buy that kind of experience. Like you can't there's no replacement for that. And I find that even with just in general nursing, you see the nurse who's been doing something forever and they may not have all the answers, but if they don't have the answer, they know who does. And
Exactly.
I think that's one of the I think the things that I think is probably one of the most important skills is just knowing your resources. So
And also, another thing that I can think of that ER or ED helped me so much with is having those difficult conversations because we have difficult conversations on an
every day.
hourly, minute by minute basis with people, and we set
Amen.
very firm limits with people. And I think that if people don't have that kind of experience, then they get ran over as a practitioner. I mean, my patients know they're like, you are not going to be late for your appointment because Nicole gives you 20 minutes. And if you are not there within those 20 minutes, then I'm sorry, you're going to have to be seen later, unless you have extenuating circumstance, you call the desk, all that stuff. But they know also Nicole's not going to write you pain medicine. Nicole's not going to do this. Nicole's not going to do this. Nicole is not absolutely going to put up with you calling and cursing out the staff or anything like that. Like my patients just know that that is not going to happen. And if it does happen, it happens one time and then that's it.
Yeah. I think, yeah, having that life experience and that experience as a nurse is really, you mentioned that it's a foundation. I think it's very, to me, and this is as someone who's not a nurse practitioner, so take it with a huge grain of salt. But like, I can't imagine going to that next level without being really solid on your practice as a nurse. But I see it all the time. I see a
Absolutely.
lot of people going from, I always joke around that they want to go from zero to hero. And
Exactly.
some will argue, but that's how med school does it. And it's true. Med school does it just that way, where you go from, you know, a college kid taking college classes to med school. And but I think the big difference is all the time they spend in the clinical environment, the med school environment, in the practice environment
Absolutely.
is the difference there.
Yeah, and like I mean, we've mentioned the foundation is just going to be key to all of this is to having that because if you don't have anything to draw from, how can you treat people on the other side of the desk and make those decisions, those final decisions and write those prescriptions and make those diagnoses and order all these tests and everything if you just don't have the foundation?
Yeah.
And some schools, it's kind of bothers me because some schools do not require any nursing experience before people come. And I have seen that. And I ask people first day of clinical, I'm like, so where'd you work as a nurse? How long have you been a nurse? What area did you work in? And what area are you working in now? And things like that. You would just be so surprised at how many have zero experience.
I'm
But
sure. I'm sure it's I'm sure it's more than we'd like to imagine. So,
yes,
it's something that I think we're seeing more and more as again, people Now, part of this, I think, is the nursing schools are really encouraging that, and they're really encouraging, like, go, 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 stay in school, get it all done, and I see the value in staying in school and not getting sidetracked. Like you mentioned, your 1 year off became 3 years off in a hurry, and the same thing happened for me where I, put off getting my going back for my master's long enough. Next thing you know, I'm like going, "Holy cow, it's been, a while." So, um, it's, it's certainly there's something to be said for that momentum, but it really is, I think, key to really getting the experience that you're gonna need, that you're gonna draw on as a nurse practitioner.
Yes.
Now, when we talk about nurse practitioner, when we talk about advanced degrees, when we talk about advanced practice degrees, I know there's advanced practice nurses who are practitioners, who are like nurse practitioners, and then there's the other, and I don't know the whole all of these, but there's the practitioner degree or the advanced practice degrees that are non-clinical or non-practitioners.
So there's
Can we
4.
talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So there's 4 advanced practice, like, degrees or positions that you can. So the first one is, well, I say the first one, they're in no particular order. I'm just partial to nurse practitioners because I am a nurse practitioner. So
Yep.
let me throw that out there. So first is APRN, which is Advanced Practice Registered Nurse. In different states, they're called different things. Some of them say certified nurse practitioners. Some of them say RN practitioners. So it just depends. Different states say different things. So that's one of them. And so that typically, all of these, and I honestly don't know about a couple of them, but this one has, you can have a master's degree and then you can have a doctorate degree, of course, and most of them are like that now. But it just really depends. I heard in 2010 or whenever I was thinking about going to school that the doctorate degree is going to be required by 2020. And so then 2020 came around, and that's why I did BS into DNP. Then 2020 came around, and oh, we're not requiring that now. Not quite yet, but 2025. And so I still haven't seen that requirement where it was going to be the degree. So you can also be a certified nurse midwife. And so
Okay.
that's an advanced practice degree as well. And so we have a couple of certified nurse midwives, and that is kind of it's not a newer thing, but it's kind of, and whenever I was first starting to go to school, like I said, I was like, oh, this nurse practitioner thing, this is going to explode and be like this huge thing. Well, certified nurse midwives, I feel like are in that era right now. Because our hospital was very like, we are not hiring midwives. We are not doing that. We're only hiring obstetricians and gynecologists for that area for women's health. And then next thing we know, a couple of the OBGYNs left, and there was left with one OBGYN. And he was like, the only way that I will stay is if you hire certified nurse midwives. And so he actually has 2 APRNs and 2 certified nurse midwives, and that has been wonderful. Another thing you can do is a clinical nurse specialist. And so that's an advanced practice degree. And I know several of those people, and they do a lot of quality improvement type things. And I know that we have some that practice as advanced practice nurses. One of ours, she's a CNS and she has a DNP, and she works in our urology department, and she can write prescriptions and different things like that. And so the last one is a CRNA. And so those are all the 4 advanced practice, paths that people can take.
I know the
Yes.
VA, the federal system was really invested in the CNS degree. There's a lot of VA jobs for CNSs, but there wasn't like a ton of jobs. And I hadn't heard of CNSs that had like prescription authority. Like I hadn't heard of that. Um, so that's one that always gets me kind of confused. And
So I'm not as well versed on CNSs just because I'm not one, but I know that the one that we have does. But I think it depends on what state they're in because a lot of states, I don't want to say a lot, but some states CNSs don't have title protection. And so it's almost like they don't recognize them as advanced practice nurse, so they won't give them prescriptive authority.
yeah,
But some states do. And so it's kind of not uniform across all the states.
gotcha. Yeah. That was one that always kinda confused me because I was always like, I
Mhm.
I I don't know what that means. And you're right, the ones that I've seen have all been, like, in, like, quality and, like,
Mhm.
process improvement and doing those kinds of things, and, like, I think Ron Kraus isn't that his
Yes. Yep.
he's so now you mentioned that you did the acute care nurse practitioner and the family nurse practitioner, and I think I know why. Is that based on your state that it's my understanding is family nurse practitioners can't work in the hospital in your state, is
Correct.
that true?
Correct. And that is like this big point of contention with several different states about because some states are saying that family nurse practitioners can work in the emergency department. And this is this huge thing between ENA, AAENP, and just different places that put out position statements. Because technically, family nurse practitioners don't have the training, like the suturing and central lines and all of those acute care procedures. And so, working in the emergency department honestly is probably inappropriate for a family nurse practitioner. But a lot of states let family nurse practitioners work in the emergency department. Mine is one of them because the hospital system I work at, I know that both nurse practitioners in the ER are family nurse practitioners.
I know a friend of mine did, she just did the Vanderbilt program, a couple years ago, and she did the, emergency nurse practitioner,
Mhm.
tracked, but there was the family nurse practitioner part was first,
Yes,
um, to
and
kinda
that's a
get
dual
around that
role
to kinda get
also.
around that because what I've seen in my experience is the nurse practitioners that I'd worked with in the past in the emergency department worked in the emergency department, but for the most part, they did, like, the minor care area.
Mhm.
Now
Yeah,
there's one that started to kinda work more and just kinda seeing regular patients in the ER, but she didn't do, like, trauma and recess and, like, she wasn't doing central lines and all that stuff, but she was seeing the patients. She was seeing the vast majority of the patients that came through the emergency department.
yeah, and that's like a lot of places will do that. They'll put them in the, fast track or
Mm, yeah.
whatever, minor medical. Those are usually the areas that people will put nurse practitioners. But some health systems don't have a minor medical area, really. They just have, because I worked in, one of the smaller cities, and they had a smaller hospital. It was a 10-bed ED, and I worked as a nurse practitioner, and they didn't have a minor med area, so I just worked in the regular, adult emergency department. And so that's been just kind of this thing that people are realizing now, I think. And one thing about the ENP, I think it's a great program. I have not done that. I could qualify to sit for the exam, and I probably will at some point soon, but not all states recognize that certification. And so some people do all this work and don't realize, and that's something that I would advise people is to study your state board of nursing or whoever the nurse practitioners are under in the state, because sometimes it's not the board of nursing.
Yeah, sometimes
But
they
to
fall
make
under Board of Medicine, right?
yeah, and sometimes they're under both boards. Some have, like, this, joint board that has nursing and medicine, so that's something important to find out, but it's also important to find out the state that you wanna work in, if they recognize your certification or because some people do all this work and they move to whatever state, and then they're like, "Oh my gosh, my certification is no good here."
It happened to a friend of mine. She did the FNP and then the emergency nurse practitioner and then found out that the state didn't recognize the emergency nurse practitioner. So,
That would be so disheartening because 'cause you've done all that work and took the test and everything.
yeah, I couldn't even imagine. Couldn't even imagine, like, not knowing that beforehand. So,
Yeah.
definitely gotta do your research. Now
Yes.
now why would people wanna become a nurse practitioner? Who's the kind of people that end up saying, "Okay, the RN, I wanna take the next level and go to a nurse practitioner?"
So ideally, the people that should go to nurse practitioner school, obviously you need to have the want to do it. But in my experience, I have had several students that they're only doing it because they're like, well, I want to make more money or whatever. And I mean, honestly, you can make as much as a nurse you can make as much as being a nurse as a nurse practitioner does, and it just depends on like, where the setting that the nurse practitioner works in and stuff like that, because you do get paid less, like, in the clinics, but you pay for convenience, like not being on call, not working weekends, not working holidays, and,
Yes, ma'am.
all of that. And, but ideally, I have seen several students that I can tell they don't really want to do it and their heart's not really in that part. They just think that it's going to be like, they want their nurse practitioner so that they can, be with their kids at night or whatever, and they won't have to work 12-hour shifts as a nurse anymore.
Sure.
But the ones that I have seen that I feel like should go to nurse practitioner school are the ones that want to do it. They're motivated and want to learn, because I precept hundreds, I wanna say, of students. I have precepted in the years as a nurse and as a nurse practitioner, and I can usually tell on day 1 if somebody's gonna make a good nurse practitioner, because those are the ones. I have a guy with me right now that's precepting with me, and I can tell he's gonna be excellent, because even from I always say, "What semester are you in? Have you done clinicals before?" Things like that, and of course, "Where do you work at? How long have you been a nurse?" And he works in the ICU, and day 1, we went in to see a patient, and he said, we walk out, and he was like, "Do you think I could try to see the next patient by myself?" And I'm like, "Yeah, absolutely you can." And then tell me what you think or whatever. But and this is his first clinical ever as a nurse practitioner student.
Nice.
And I can just tell he wants to learn this stuff. But this girl that I had that ended last week, her term ended last week, she still would never see a patient on her own. And I had to
Mm.
kind of like push her a little bit. And I don't feel like she'll be as successful because it's like she's not motivated and wants to get in there and do stuff. And I think she's just doing it because she started it and she's like, well, I got this far into it. I might as well finish.
Yeah. Yeah. If money's your motivator, I don't know if that's the right way to go. Because I know, and I think it varies greatly by state, but I know in the last state I was in, the nurse practitioners made about as much as I did,
Mhm.
and it wasn't much more. Certainly they had different perks to their schedule and stuff like that, and certainly they were fell under a different. So where I worked for the hospital, they worked for the School of Medicine, which had by far better retirement and things like that. So there certainly was a trade-offs, but the money was pretty equal. But I was kind of capped out towards the end, and they were going to be surpass me at some point. If money's your motivator, I'm not sure how that, you know. And that was actually one of the questions. One of the questions was that there's a lot of nurses right now who are still working as nurses because the pay is about the same, or they can't find jobs. So
Yes, and that has been a big issue. Some I feel like a bunch of people after I went, I didn't have trouble finding preceptors, but I'm also very assertive with people. And I knew for my acute care clinicals, I was going to have to do some clinicals with an internal med doc. And I saw one come down to the ER one time, and I didn't see them a whole lot, but we were holding patients, which apparently we never do, but we were holding patients down there, and internal med came down, and I beeline toward her, and I was like, "Hey, can I please do some clinicals with you? I don't do clinicals for another year and a half, but can I hit you up now?" And she was like, "Yeah, absolutely." But it's just been interesting because when I was doing it, it was kind of easy to find preceptors. And now it's very difficult because I feel like the market is very saturated right now, because now this is kind of the chic thing to do, is to go to nurse practitioner school. And I know several that graduated right before COVID, and so they had difficulty finding jobs because the market is saturated, but a lot of places were furloughing people and laying people off and things like that. And so a bunch of them went to go work as travel nurses. And so they were
mhm,
making way more as travel nurses than nurse practitioners could even think about making. And
yeah.
some of them, I know one called me last week who was my student, and she is still working as a travel nurse, and she graduated 2 years ago.
We had, we had a few nurses that were, NPs that were working as travel nurses because during COVID, the travel money was just so good. Like,
Yeah.
it was, everyone was jumping on that bandwagon. Um,
Yeah.
but I gotta think that if I was to go to school for a nurse practitioner, like, I feel like that would be I feel like that would be so demotivating to then, you know, turn around and go back to working as a nurse when you have this, greater experience and greater, knowledge base and education, and then not use it working as an RN, to me would be,
Yes.
I don't know, that would
I would
bother me.
be
I wouldn't be able to do it.
insulted. I would personally be insulted because I remember, a few years ago, it was right before COVID, the marketer at our hospital asked me to go with one of the physicians and do some sports physicals for the college. So we get there, and then the college is like, "Oh, the NCAA or whatever, they don't allow nurse practitioners to sign the physical forms." And I was like, "Well, I don't know why they asked me to do it then." So then they had me, take vital signs and basically do what a nurse would do, and I just remember being so insulted. I was like, "Man, I have this advanced practice degree, and you're having me take blood pressures and weights."
And yeah, I bet that's got to be, yeah, that's not gonna. y- You're come on, what are you doing? So I was just looking. Oh, let's see. I was just trying to look up what is the average pay for nurse practitioners.
It does vary by state, but, that would be a good general question.
Yeah, I'm just asking, like, I'm typing into Google, what's the average pay of nurse practitioners in the US? And it is saying, let's see. No, basically it says, yeah, it depends. That's
Yeah, it
Google's
really
answer
is
is it
state.
depends.
Yeah, state by state.
So, yeah,
And some people ask if you get paid more if you have a doctorate versus a master's as a nurse practitioner.
it's a
And
good
the
question.
answer to that is that it varies also because I did not get paid one penny more for having my doctorate degree.
That's well, but there's precedent for that in nursing, right? Because
Oh
nurses
yeah.
nurses used to get mad when, the associate's degree nurse and the bachelor's degree nurse. Maybe a bachelor's degree nurse got paid just a smidge more, but for the
Yeah.
most part, it was pretty close to the same.
Yeah, I think
So,
the place you get paid more for having, like, a doctorate would probably be academia, to be honest with you, because I know
yeah,
in the college that I taught at when I had my bachelor's degree, you got, like, 5,000 more a year for each degree. So, like, bachelor's to master's, you got a $5,000 raise, and then master's to
nice.
doctorate, you got 1,000.
But
Yeah.
yeah, the precedent was always, bachelor's degree and associate's degree, there was just a minor difference in the pay. So I'm not surprised that from master's degree to DNP, there's in a clinic, for instance, it may not be may not be a difference in pay. So I
Yeah, and a
Googled,
whole 'nother thing would be to talk about negotiating contracts and, like, negotiating that into your contract, like, "Well, I have a DNP," and, so people could do that, but I remember from my associates to my bachelor's, I got 25 cents more an hour, but when I got my CEN, I got 5% more.
I got my CEN, so I don't know if I'll leave this in the podcast or not. So I got my CEN, I got my associate's degree in nursing, and I started nursing at like 1990 something dollars, $19.90 an hour or something like that. And the hard part for me was I was working at the community college teaching full time, and I was making $35 an hour at the community college as an instructor with no degree. So I was like, I remember going to my boss going, seriously, all you're gonna pay me is $20 an hour. And I was working as a tech like you were. I was working as a tech in the ER. And granted, I was completely overpaid as a tech. Like I was making, you know, I I didn't realize at the time. So at the time when I was a tech, I think I was making like 17 and change. So I was
Wow.
making almost as much as the new grad nurses,
Yeah.
which I didn't realize. Um, but that was because I was a supervisor and yeah, they had kind of a career ladder, but which is almost unheard of. Um, but yeah, my boss said, "Go back and get your bachelor's degree. That'll get you to nurse too." And that was like $2.50 more an hour. Or he goes, "Or go get a certificate, go get a certification, and that gives you $5 an hour more." So, I think I was a nurse for about maybe 6 or 8 months, and I went and got my CEN because I was like, "I gotta
Yeah.
pass this test."
Why
To
wouldn't
make the
you?
more money. Yeah. So, uh, yeah, that forced me to take the test pretty early on. So I was a nurse well less than a year when I took the CEM exam and luckily passed and have, you know, kept it. I let it lapse once, and I'll never do that again because I had to go take the test again,
Same.
right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when I Googled the, average nurse, average NP wage by state, and it just gave me a handful of states. It said California is about $140,000 a year. New York's about 120. Texas, where I'm at, is only about 111. In Florida, it's less than that. It's about 101. So again, it varies by state, and I'm sure that's part of it is it's a supply and demand, right?
Yeah,
And
and it's
and
also where you work. If you work in the hospital, obviously you get paid more, and if you
yeah,
work in the clinic, you don't get paid as much, so
yeah, yeah. So a lot of variables there. A lot of variables there that make a difference on whether or not how much you're gonna get paid as a nurse practitioner. How did you weigh out the, taking on the debt versus the change in income bracket?
So what I did is I just kind of did a cost analysis, and it's kind of funny saying that now because I did not have any business background whatsoever, and now I'm almost done with business school, and I'm like, "Oh, it made sense I did that. How did I know to do that?" But I just did this cost analysis about, and I looked up what the average salary of a nurse practitioner in Arkansas was. And then I looked at how much I was making as a nurse, how much I just made these whole lists of how many hours I was having to work to make. I looked up a bunch of different schools and I kind of did cost analysis on all those of which one was going to be the most cost efficient for me. And did I have to take the GRE and just things like that? I started in 2011 for my nurse practitioner. I looked up like how much debt was this going to put me in? And so basically what I ended up doing is I just ended up working a crap ton as a nurse and, like, when the semesters, because I went to a school where I did have to go summer semesters and stuff, but in the, breaks, I just worked, like, all the time. And I still worked pretty much full time during school, and I ended up just paying for my degree. And I just knew that for 4 years it was gonna be real tough, and I was gonna be either working or doing clinical or doing homework all the time. And the key is to have a very understanding spouse and family as well. Like
Right?
this is gonna be tough for a few
It's gonna
years,
suck
but
for
if
a little
y'all
while.
can, yeah, if y'all can just deal with it, we will it will be so much better. So I personally graduated debt free, which is awesome because I do hear some of my colleagues saying that they spent almost six figures going to school and now they have, thousand or more dollar student loan payments.
Mhm.
And there are ways you can get around that too, because you can work for like a federally qualified health center and they have grants that will pay back your loans, or you can write it into your contract or something like that. So there are ways to do it. I just didn't want to have to jump through all those hoops.
Makes sense. Makes
But
sense.
but to do all of that work, I mean, I would just look at how much are you gonna have to borrow? Are you willing to work full time or and it's gonna if you do that, it's gonna be very difficult, but can you afford to go down to part time? Are you gonna have to take out loans? Then how many years am I gonna use this degree and is the cost gonna be worth it? Am I gonna get a return on investment pretty much?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, speaking of schools, let's talk a little bit about schools because one of the questions that everyone always asks is, how do you pick the right school? And I know that's very subjective, right? Like I know
Yes.
there's a million factors for this, and your mileage may vary. Um,
Yeah.
but what are some just kind of general kind of advice you would have for picking a school and finding a school?
So, of course, brick and mortar schools are always available. And to me, this is my personal opinion, those are the best ones as far as learning experience. Because everyone I know that has gone to a brick and mortar school, they are just outstanding. They have very good clinical judgment. They have great clinical skills. Like they have all kinds of great stuff. And that's not always feasible for people. And then you have the other extreme where it's pretty much all online and you only do your clinicals in person or something like that. And those schools I've learned, and there are a couple of ones that just come to mind right away. And of course, I'm not going to say the name of them, but those ones I find they don't turn out as well for the most part, just because they don't have that interaction with the instructors. My school that I went to was kind of a hybrid where you had to go down there X amount of times, and it was like 11 hours away from me. And I did like the cost. I tried to figure out what was going to be the most cost efficient. And so this one actually, your tuition was paid as an online. If you were out of state, you still got the in state tuition rate. And so it was like decent price. And so I had to go down there though. Before I even started the program, I had to go down there for like a 3 or 4 day intensive orientation. And then we did all of this stuff like back and forth. And it was before like Zoom got real big and everything.
Mhm.
And then before I started clinicals, I had to go down there again. And it was a 3 or 4 day intensive where you got all your clinical skills. You had to do all of that. You had to do it in front of an instructor, get checked off, and all of that. And then I had to go down there again at the end of the program to present my DNP project in person. So those to me are usually some of the best ones if you can't do the brick and mortar thing where you
Yeah.
go to class all the time. I think those ones where you have to go down there and interact with your instructors and actually get checked off in front of a person, I think those are the best ones.
Yeah, I think it makes a big difference because if it's an all distance program, then you're kind of learning on your own.
Yeah, yeah. And like we were talking about earlier, if you don't have that nursing foundation to back up your experience, you're just teaching yourself
That'd be
from
hard.
something you don't even know about.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. That's one of the things that's always kind of tough is that it's, you know, distance education doesn't work for everything. Like
Yes.
it's not ideal for everything. So
And some of the other things that you want to look at, of course, you want to look at cost. You want to make sure the school's accredited. You might want to talk to other students that have gone to that school because they can tell you the experience and things like that. Some schools, and I know this is kind of a point of contention sometimes too, but some schools find preceptors for you. All of them are technically supposed to find preceptors for you, according to certain organizations. But some schools do not find preceptors for people, and you have to find your own preceptor. And that's kind of how my school was, and I'm sure it's changed some now. But when I went, I had to find all my own preceptors. And so that was very daunting for somebody. Like I said, I'm pretty assertive, so I had no problems walking up to people and going, "Hey," and you can cut this out if you want to, but I even remember I was at my gynecology appointment one year and I was like, after she got done and everything, I was like, "Hey, would you precept me in here now? Because I really need a gynecology preceptor." And I was like, I mean, I did, but
that's funny.
she
That's a
precepted.
hustler right there. That's a hustler. That's funny. That's
But
really
that's
funny.
important to be able to find preceptors, and some schools don't give very good assistance with that.
Yeah, I think I don't know how many times I see on Facebook, people looking for nurse practitioner clinicals and and reaching out to people who have like a big network and that's why having a good network to lean on is super important. Um, it's just another reason why that's important. But yeah, it's that's got to be a bit of a challenge if your school doesn't support you on that. So
Yeah, and some people move, like they'll move from one state to another and they've already started school and then their spouse will get relocated or something like that. And so they'll have to move to a different state and they know essentially nobody in that state. So it's harder for them to find preceptors, especially if the school isn't good about doing that. And that's why one of the things I recommend, and this is just a pearl from me, is whenever you start nurse practitioner school, you need to join your state nurse practitioner organization. I am a big proponent of people joining their professional organizations to begin with. but you need to join your state nurse practitioner organization as a student. Number one, the rate is cheaper. And number two, you can get in there and network with those people, learn who the leaders in that group are. Because I'm current until midnight tonight, actually, for a whole year, I've been president of Arkansas Nurse Practitioner Association. And so people will reach out to me and they're like, Nicole, do you know anybody in, the east side of the state that might precept me? And I'm like, as a matter of fact, I do. What, do you need family practice, GYN? And I've met a whole lot of people networking that way. And so all students, I think, should definitely do that because you're going to get tapped into a network that you didn't even know was possible, and you are gonna get a lot of help that way. As long as you get involved, you can't just, sit there and join and be like, "Okay, preceptors come to me."
Right. Yeah. And I tell people that all the time for, joining an organization anyway. Because that's how you network with people who do what you do. I mean,
Exactly.
that's 100%. Like, if it wasn't for my professional organization, like all the guests you hear on the podcast, like you may not hear it had it not been for, ENA and being involved. I mean, it's one thing to be a card carrying member. I'm a card carrying member of AACN or AACCN or whatever the critical
Mhm.
care
Yeah, me
group.
too.
I
AACA.
I do have I am a member of that as well, but I'm not an active member like I am with ENA, and
Yes.
and
Yes.
and what I get out of it, there's definitely a big difference between those 2. Yeah,
Yes.
so you got it's not enough to just, pay the dues, you gotta actually go and get involved, so
Yes.
it's great, really, really great advice. So, now, one question I have for you is in that transition now, did you transition you talked about the transition from tech to a nurse and the transition from nurse to nurse practitioner. Did you do that in the same hospital that you were working in?
Yes.
How
Yes.
was that transition? Because that's really, really hard. And
It
I,
is.
I realize how hard that is. I realize how hard that is that the organization. One day I think I'd been a nurse for 5 years. And one of the attending physicians who, I've worked with probably at least a couple times a month for 5 years, said something and he just looked at me one day and he goes, "Oh, you're a nurse?" He goes, "I thought you were a tech." And I'm like, "How what?" And because that's how he knew me, is at first was a tech. And like I'd never advanced in his eyes or whatever it was. And I was like going, how do you not know? Like I was the charge nurse for God's sakes. I'm like, how do you not know that?
Yeah.
I guess maybe I was just bossy as a tech too, but how is that transition in your same place of employment from the RN to the NP?
So here's what I did, and this may work for people, it may not. But what I did is I did not shut up about it. When I was going to school, I told everybody I was going to school, the doctors, everybody, the nurses, the techs. I told the housekeepers, everybody knew I was in nurse practitioner school. But additionally, on top of that, I think I gained respect this way as well. Not that I didn't already have it, but I think people had a newfound respect because I would go up to the doctors and I would just be like, "Hey, can I watch you do this next central line and not assist as I would as a nurse, but I really want you to talk me through this. Can you please explain this to me?" And I was all the time, I'm sure that internally they were just rolling their eyes, but I mean, I would go up to them at a shift and I sat down, the nephrologist came down to the ED one day and I sat down and I was like, "Hey, can you talk to me about hyponatremia? Because I know it's really like difficult." And he turned around and he was like, "Yes, I can." And so he was like talking, and these doctors love to teach. And so I just tried to soak up all the knowledge that I could so that when I got out, instead of saying, "Nicole, I didn't know you were a nurse practitioner," they were like, "Oh, I thought you were a nurse practitioner 2 years ago."
Good
So
for
that's
you.
what helped me is, I mean, I just got the word out there and I just tried to pick everybody's brains about everything. And the good thing too about that is when I did graduate, everybody was so excited and they just really celebrated it because they were like, "Man, she's been kind of doing this and we've been prepping her for 4 years now and she's done it."
That's awesome. That's awesome. How did your mind shift have to change? How did your mind have to shift for going from the nurse role to the nurse practitioner role? What was like the big mindset shift that you had to go through in that?
Well, as a nurse, you know that you kind of make these decisions that the providers make anyway. You kind of you anticipate what's going to happen and whatever. And so the hardest thing for me is like saying, "Oh, I know they're gonna do this, so let me get it ready," or whatever, and the next thing you know, you're like, "Oh god, that's me, I gotta get that ready, I know I gotta do this now." It and it kinda makes you just take a step back like, "Oh my gosh, now I'm in charge of this whole, like, patient, I have to figure out what's wrong with them, I have to do all of this myself," and so it's really hard on that transition sometimes, and you just have to kinda take a deep breath and just be like, "Okay, I have been preparing for this for a while and I've been doing all this and I know this stuff." And so, one thing that I recommend also to everybody is to find a mentor. It could be one of your preceptors, it could be one of your new colleagues or something like that, but you have got to find a mentor because you do not know everything
Mm.
and nobody knows everything. But again, like we talked about earlier, you need to know who does know certain things. And so I had great mentors whenever I was up and coming as a nurse practitioner. And now I am on the other side of that where I'm serving as
Now
that
you're the mentor.
mentor to people. And it's great. It's a great transition, but it's just getting your mindset is very difficult whenever you're becoming a nurse practitioner from a nurse because I remember when I first started, I was like, I didn't have, when I first started at the clinic, I did not have my own nurse. And so I remember thinking, well, I'm a nurse. I'll just go give them my own shots or I'll just go room the patients myself. I know how to take a blood pressure. And that did me a disservice at first as a nurse practitioner because how's that proving to administration that I need a nurse? And so they were like, well, she's doing all this stuff on her own. She doesn't need a nurse. She will just, make her work. And so finally I put my foot down and did some boundaries or whatever. But it is very hard because in my brain, I know I can do all that. I know I can give shots. I know I can do vital signs, but you have to kind of take a step back and just that's not your role anymore. I'll jump in and help absolutely if we need it. But again, that did me a disservice whenever I first started because it took over a year to convince administration that I needed my own nurse.
Wow. Yeah. You don't think about that, but that's, yeah, certainly you don't want to make yourself too available.
Yes.
Well, this has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate you taking the time to kind of talk through some of these things. There's so much more to this that we didn't get a chance to get to, but I think we got a pretty good foundation for the kind of the transition, um, from RN to nurse practitioner. I think this has been really interesting. It's certainly given me a lot of insight that I didn't have before.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really glad to be on here and I'm happy to answer any questions. They can find me on Facebook or anything and I'm happy to answer any questions because I know how difficult it is to go through. I mean, I didn't have a mentor when I was going through the whole process. I just kind of figured it out on my own. And now I feel like I'm a mentor for so many people. And I'm like, oh God, don't make this mistake that I did. And so it's kind of lessons learned thing. And I really feel like I have a passion for students and people that are transitioning. I wrote some textbook chapters in like a transitional textbook from nurse to nurse practitioner. It's called
It's
RN to
awesome.
MSN and so I wrote a few chapters in that and I really enjoy helping people through that. And in fact, myself, Kat Hammond and Bradley Rund are doing a presentation for new nurse practitioners at EN23.
Oh, that's super exciting.
Yeah.
Hopefully they record that and make that widely available because I think that's something a lot of people would be really interested in. So
Yeah, absolutely. Because we talk about how to negotiate contracts and how to set boundaries and some of the things that you and I have talked about that are challenges whenever you become a new nurse practitioner, like the mindset and things like that, we will be talking about in that presentation.
very cool. Very cool. So if you're going to be at EN23, then that'd be a perfect presentation for you to go to and hear a little bit more and hear the kind of the next level of this topic. So, well, very cool. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this with me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This has been a really an awesome time
Me too.
in Austin too.
Thanks for listening to the Art of Emergency Nursing podcast. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Facebook.